Life is a lot like jazz. And in fact, we have today a very good friend who happens to see his life through the music of jazz. In fact, his political life is very much associated with his decision-making capabilities and capacities. Today, I have the pleasure to have with us Mr. Vassilios Demetriades, who's the former Deputy Shipping Minister of the Republic of Cyprus. My name is Dr. Marios Eftimiopoulos. I'm the CEO of Strategy International, and this is Prime Analysis. Dear Mr. Demetriades, thank you very much for coming at Strategy International.
Marius, the pleasure is mine. Thank you for the opportunity to exchange views and have a nice conversation on all the current issues.
Thank you very much, Vassilios. Thank you. It's a great pleasure and honor to have you at Strategy International. Now, considering, we're going to start with jazz. So, considering the fact that you recently published a book that life is about jazz, I want you to show us a bit about your book and tell us a few things about your book.
Well, the book, the title of the book is Society Jazz.
Let me hold it
Yes,
here
of course.
I can show it to our friends. There you go. Thank you very much.
By the way, the plan is to translate it in English as of next year. So,
excellent.
Basically, the book is a docufiction. It provides 32 stories of the last 20 years from my experience in Brussels and in Cyprus. And the reason of the title, Society Jazz, is to show that in jazz, in art, and in music, when you improvise, the result is the optimum, and the artists basically they improvise when they produce over the saxo a great jazz music. But in life, in politics, in social life, when you just improvise without having a vision or a strategy or a plan, then the result might be disastrous. So the 32 stories is centered around this, let's say, metaphoric way of presenting jazz to show that we need to have a plan when we decide about our society, about the future of our young generation.
It is very interesting because recently I came to one of your events where you're presenting your book, and I felt quite intrigued about the fact that you have 32 different stories. So I will start a bit about your life. We did present to our audience the fact that you were a former Minister of Shipping for the Republic of Cyprus, which actually means a political life. But these 32 different stories. 30 stories. These 30 stories are life stories. So I want to go back, if you want, to the first part of the story, which is the entrance of Cyprus into the European Union and you being found in Brussels.
Well, I was part of the whole negotiation process of Cyprus to the EU on the maritime transport issues. I was also part of the formulation of the Annan plan, or the turning our national laws to federal laws.
Right.
So I experienced also the Turkish Cypriot side, but also our first years in Brussels, because I was the first maritime councillor from 2004 to 2008. So during all these first years, difficult years, how Brussels and the EU labyrinth is functioning, it was really difficult for the Cypriot administrative and national framework to understand. So it was very interesting to see how we've been treated by the big states, by the EU institutions, how we should have, approach the whole thing, and what sort of negotiating techniques we should, let's say, put forward in order to gain certain things and gain credibility, first of all, in this EU family. So in the first part of the book, I'm presenting a number of stories, how we've been treated, how Cyprus as a small member state
Was seen in the
was
EU.
seen in the
probably, yeah.
EU, and how the national system should be adjusted in order to, let's say, meet the challenges.
Within your book, you're stressing very much. I mean, I've read through your book. You're stressing very much what somebody would call in the political language decision-making process. And at several instances, you're describing a good negotiator. You're describing a person who thinks dimensionally, because it is obvious that in your book it's very Europeanized. You've been influenced a lot by other European cultures. How important was it for you, by being in Brussels, and I know you even said that in the presentation of your book, that you had to spend some time with people that are not of your national identity, they're from other countries, and that you had to convince them in a very honest way of the combinations of the things that they would come, obviously, in maritime affairs. How did you balance all these things?
Well, when you land in a place like Brussels, you have first of all to be ready to listen and to be acquainted to the cultures of other nations. First of all, to understand how the other nations and other countries think, what are their interests on many issues and aspects, how they behave, whether they are introvert or extrovert, in order to adjust yourself accordingly.
Right.
So the lesson number one is to be a good listener. So,
And you stress that in the end of your chapters as well.
of course, in order to understand what are the needs of other states, because if you are in a family, you are not just there to present your own interests, and you fight only for your own interests. It's a give and take.
Right.
Is the art, you need to learn the art of a compromise, where nobody is satisfied, but everybody can live with the end result. So the message through the book, through specific stories, is to know how and the best timing to present your own interests and fight for your own interests, but at the same time be ready to provide support to other states when they are in need of that support. We are not only there to fight for our own interests, especially when you are a small state and you cannot influence through your voting power the end result.
Since this conversation that we're going to have will have different sectors, if you want, and sections of discussion.
Certainly.
I want to go back a few years. Vassilios, the student.
Yes.
Vassilios being in England, and Vassilios probably being influenced from his studies and the vision that he has about himself. I know that a lot of young people are watching and listening, and you know, we all pass through studentship through different countries. How important was it to study in a foreign country? How important was it to bring back the lessons learned into your lifeline, and how important it is to your scientific world implementing science into political affairs at the time where you're designated as Minister of Shipping?
Well, first of all, the importance of studying and getting a BSc or an MSc diploma is not only to have a more dynamic CV when you seek for a job, but is more developing the critical thinking, is living abroad to find your own way and to inject in your own way of thinking different cultures. And I think this is invaluable when you go back now and see how things are developing and how you formulate a policy or a decision on X, Y issues. Then, of course, the lessons you learn from your student life, from your BSc or postgraduate.
And your network that you developed throughout these years.
Of course, is invaluable, because students should develop while they are reading a book, while they are ready for an exam. They should develop what we are saying critical thinking, to be able to evaluate certain facts and to dare to present their own views and suggestions on the way forward, thinking out of the box.
Right. I mean, one of the good things I think from that comes out of the as a good positive criticism towards your book, I think you were also influenced on the way of writing, and I think I told you during the day of your presentation that you're using in the Greek language short sentences, very good in description, and at the same time it makes you wonder, it makes you travel. Because you seem to be very descriptive in your surroundings, so it's like going 360 all around and showcasing this.
Well, you know, Marius, when I returned from Brussels the first time, back in 2009, the Cyprus Academy of Public Administration, they have asked me to present some lections from my experience to all the public administration, how the EU works, how we should negotiate in the EU institutions as a small member states. And I realized that nobody in Cyprus was aware about this EU family. It's too complicated, and nobody is willing to read a textbook how the procedures work. So I said, it was the first time I said we should explain that through simple language, through practical examples. And that's why you see the first part of the book, it's all about how the EU is functioning through, real examples, and how we should act in this family. It's a much simpler way through a novel, let's put it this way, for normal people to understand that this EU complex family that decides about 70% of the legal framework that our state is functioning, how is performing, in how is reacting to certain circumstances, whether it takes good note of the interests of the 27 family members, and how Cyprus is treated there.
A lot of things have been influenced on your life based on shipping, based on the strategies and the country to country to the EU relations on shipping. I want to go into the next chapter, which is not so much the life of Vassilios as a graduate or postgraduate or as a young professional, but rather the Vassilios who's there in the EU on maritime affairs. You're extremely descriptive on the book, stating we were trying to allocate what we're supposed to do and how we're supposed to do it. Very important. But few months, years later, you're stronger, wiser, you know how to negotiate. Tell us a few things about the importance on maritime security, maritime affairs, the importance on shipping, and how it reflected you towards your work as a minister on shipping and maritime affairs. Because one of your success stories, and we need to say that, was the connection of Cyprus with Greece, I think 21 years. 21 years after, maritime connection from Cyprus to Greece for else than cargo. How did you end up with this?
Well, first, allow me to say that I feel blessed that I worked in this sector for 25 years in very crucial positions, being the first representative of Cyprus to the EU, the first maritime counselor of Cyprus to the EU back in 2004, then working for the European Commission, working next to the ministers responsible for shipping that time, working next to commissioners, being responsible and coordinating the maritime transport strategy of the EU, coordinate the EU maritime external affairs of the EU in relation to shipping, EU-US, EU-Iran, EU-Brazil, EU-Japan maritime transport relations, and a number of initiatives on the maritime sustainability. So grasping from all these experiences and the opportunities that I have to be present in many negotiations from between the European Commission and a number of countries from the north or the south part of Europe, but also with our external trading partners, it was a valuable experience for me to, when I was appointed as a minister, to bring back home and to know how to put maritime policy and maritime politics into the right perspective to develop a national strategy for this very important sector for our country, but also how to serve from Cyprus the global shipping industry, because we should not forget that shipping is global. It should be bound by global rules. And when you serve this sector, you don't just serve your country, you serve basically global trade.
So you put Cyprus in the map at a very interesting time. I'm still not going into political affairs. I'm staying at the logistics and maritime.
Okay.
So you said something important. You mentioned it, and you mentioned it privately as well at some point. The importance of national maritime and shipping policy.
Mm-hmm.
How important it is to explain to people how a mission on strategy becomes in order to foresee what Cyprus can play as a pivotal role. And we will show in political affairs how important it was or is shipping, which includes other elements, not only logistics, I presume the understanding of exclusive economic zones, the understanding of what means international boundaries in general. What does it mean to have an issue in the outer seas outside Cyprus, for example? How did you develop that? What was your vision towards the national shipping policy?
First of all, we should have in mind that shipping is perhaps the only sector that Cyprus is proud of being a big state, especially in international fora. The size of Cyprus and the richness of expertise of its people, it's something that everybody takes into account and is quite influential. So it was very challenging within the EU to represent a country and an industry that is so important, but your voting power is limited.
I'm sorry, I'm just stopping here. How developed was the industry so far, and how did it develop to the end of your tenureship as minister?
Well, first we have to know that, I mean, during my tenure, we had to face two very big crises: the health crisis with the COVID-19 pandemic, and of course the Ukraine war. Mm-hmm. So during those times, the battle and the challenge was how to respond to this crisis in order to keep the shipping industry strong and competitive, but how also to turn the crisis and challenges to opportunities. For example, during the COVID-19, most of the ships were unable to make the crew changes. Most of the crew on board used to stay for over 3-4 months because they couldn't find any ports to allow the crew change and to repatriate crew members. So Cyprus was pioneer on that to make, let's say, a priority for crews to change,
to be here,
and to be here. And this was widely acknowledged and respected from the global shipping community. That's why you've seen a number of cruise ships for the first time calling at our ports.
Right.
And then we
both
made,
Limassol and Larnaca.
of course, and then we made a program to vaccinate all these people. So Cyprus signaled that we have not only vaccinated our citizens, which was a priority, but vaccinating the citizens of the world, because seafarers, they have this specificity of being citizens of the world. So we demonstrated that in crisis, Cyprus shipping is there. Cyprus is responding. For Cyprus, shipping is a priority. And I believe we capitalize on this by having the global shipping community referring Cyprus as a best practice example. If you see reports from the United Nations, they praise Cyprus for that. Cyprus was our action was reflected in an ILO resolution on a global vaccination program following Cyprus as example. And this is the things that the shipping community globally expects to see from a responsible maritime nation. So I'm just describing an example how we have responded to the health crisis. And the same goes with the Ukraine war. When the war started and basically seafarers were in need to get their salaries and all their money were blocked in Russian and Ukraine banks, we facilitated the seafarers to open a bank account with a special procedure for seafarers in Cyprus. Plus, we have negotiated all the different sanction packages in a way, and now this is the first, let's say, political message that I would like to demonstrate and to present, that shipping, since it's global, it has to have a level playing field. So we have signaled to Brussels and to the G7 that if you have sanctions, the only thing that it might happen in shipping, the side effect is that ships will flag out from your registry. They can fly a registry that does not apply sanctions against Russia, and they can still trade. So the first important political message when it comes to shipping is that shipping should not be treated and approached as a simple mode of transport. It's the lifeblood of trade. There is no trade without ships. And therefore, we should know that the regulators globally and within the EU should approach shipping as part of their external trade policy.
Is shipping, and I'm going into political challenges here, is shipping a mainstream policy for the European Union's foreign policy objectives, business objectives, both of them? Or is it not in the capability and the capacity that you wish the EU to be?
We are not yet there, I believe.
Right.
There is a room for the regulators and in the influencers there in the EU to understand that shipping should be part of the EU external trade, should have a prominent place in the external trade relations of the EU and all the FTAs, the free trade agreements. And when you negotiate the external policies and partnership agreements with external partners, I think shipping should be one of the priorities for Europe. So, of course, it's a mode of transport. Of course, as Europeans, we should have a safety, security policy, a green policy for shipping in order for shipping to contribute to climate change challenges. But we should understand that without shipping, the intra-EU and the external EU trade, should paralyze. So it's important to adjust our policies and our focus for shipping accordingly.
And I presume now that you're no longer the Minister of Shipping and you continue to have an interest on shipping, what I do understand and I do know is that you're very much interested in the consultation of those things. Hence the company that you have created. Tell us a few things before I go to the actual deep political affairs.
Well, the company now is called Vision Do, and basically it aspires to help companies, to assist companies on their strategic planning, on how to negotiate with the regulators, on ESG, which is crucial. ESG, when we are talking about environment, social and governance issues, is not just a trend, it's a real must. So helping companies to companies to inject these policies in their daily operations, and of course helping also companies with to explore the potential of EU funds.
So now we are in a post-experience ministerial where actually political affairs have also influenced your ways of understanding and how to explain to people, making it simple. That's what I understood from your company as well.
And make all these companies to think. I'm calling unleashing blue sky thinking, which is out of the box thinking to better understand how the regulators, the policy framework could affect their daily operations, so they will enter into more proactive thinking.
Right. So proactiveness, openness,
extrovertness,
with one problem, and I'm going to the political world. We live in a very, very volatile environment. We had COVID. You mentioned COVID. You mentioned also Ukraine, Russia. And there's also now the Middle East. And everything has an impact to the maritime logistics, all of those, on energy, energy transport, LNG transport, simple logistic transport like cargo, heavy duty cargo, etc., etc. Politically, how much really are we affected, considering that not only in the Middle East we have issues, but we have also issues in the Red Sea, in the Horn of Africa, we have in the outer seas, you have piracy still, you have issues in the Straits of Malacca, and other issues in Chinese sea waters. So where do we stand with regards to maritime security in this case?
Well, it goes without saying that any geopolitical tension, either in the area or in the broader global, let's say, sphere, affects shipping. And for me, shipping is a driver of the energy independence of Europe, is the lifeblood of global trade, and therefore the issues you perfectly described, either in Africa or in the Middle East,
or climate change even.
Climate change affect and challenge the supply chain, because deep down we have we need to ensure smooth and an interactive supply chain to our societies, to our economies. And if there are barriers for shipping to function properly, then of course we are coming across inflationary pressures. We are coming across issues of political tension, and we should always have in mind that from all these difficult situations, we should always have an extra focus on how shipping is functioning, and allow from any geopolitical tension or the aftermath of a war for shipping to function properly.
Now, the Republic of Cyprus is aiming for a humanitarian corridor, and everything starts and ends with shipping transport. If you were minister, what would you do, considering that there would be a decision for humanitarian relief work from Cyprus as a European corridor to Gaza?
Well, the political initiative is positive. There's no doubt about this. But you need to examine whether this is practically doable, in which port.
It ends, you mean?
Yeah.
It starts from either Limassol or Larnaca.
Yeah, but from the other side.
Yeah, from the other side.
Which port and how the corridor will function safely, and to ensure that all the necessary goods or the first aid will be there.
Do the Maritimers have a saying into this? The Maritimers, do they have a saying in the operational framework how to fix? I mean, they know better the sea than everybody else.
I think they are. I don't know if the government has consulted the local shipping industry or the global shipping industry,
or to do a
about
benchmarking,
this.
let's say.
Yes, but I guess there are a number of ships that they are willing to engage in these operations for humanitarian reasons, in order to have the proper volume to transport them. But first, you have to ensure that from the other end, there is safety and security in place for all these ships to transport the goods safely at the end destination.
Having said that, I want to get your opinion about how does do all these wars affect the European economy and in its extension, the Cyprus economy. We've been seeing in the latest years, couple of years, no more, a total increase of everyday life expenses. And every now and then you could hear in the international media or national media that the supply chain has been affected negatively. I want you to explain to us this in a political term, that why is it affected in reality. Sometimes we say the middle people in
Yes.
between, but this may not be also accurate because it's from the beginning to the end. So it's a chain by itself as well. And how can we overcome it, considering that the world is under a new security architecture, which will be probably defined after post-war Gaza or post-war Ukraine-Russia?
Well, first of all, we should be clear that 80% of global trade is carried by sea. Therefore, maritime transport costs are an important part of the whole supply chain cost, and what at the end of the day the end user gets at the supermarkets or back home. Basically, you've seen the inequality of supply and demand after the COVID.
Yes.
And how much
Big one.
the container costs have been increased. The inflationary pressures are inevitable, increase every time there is an extra cost on maritime transport. And this is what every time there is a new initiative by the EU for a new legal framework for more stricter rules compared to the global framework. Because if you regulate something regionally, then you are the only economy that is affected is the EU one. So basically, if you have stricter environmental rules, the maritime transport costs are higher, and therefore that affects the price of the end product. So basically, we are having inflationary pressures. That's why we are fighting for a level playing field to convince the non-EU, the outside world, to use the same rules. So we should streamline the maritime transport costs across the globe. So this is not an easy task. We should not forget that at global level, the fora that decides about the shipping agenda and the future of shipping is the International Maritime Organization under the United Nations, IMO. This is an organization that has more than 170 contracting party states. It's not that easy to get a decision fast and implemented by the contracting party. That's why EU is acting faster and is trying to influence the global agenda. But it's a real must to strive for a level playing field. Otherwise, the EU economies will be much more affected by any new rules that deviate from what we have as a global framework. And it is for this reason that I'm stressing the fact that the Europeans should approach shipping not just as a mode of transport, that it has to be decarbonized, it has to be safer, more secure, more socially responsible, but it has to be approached.
And environmentally responsible, as I know.
Yes. That's why I said decarbonized.
Yeah, decarbonized.
But
I was actually thinking more of the recycling water and
the
waste as well.
And the waste and the air emissions, everything. But at the same time, we should have a close eye that shipping serves our economies, serves the global trade, serves the EU intra-trade. So when we regulate, we should always have in mind that this is a case. And we should, the shipping community has a responsibility on that. For years, it has been very introvert. It has failed to demonstrate how important is this sector for our daily lives. And that's why when the regulators are formulating something new, they don't take proper account on the role of shipping to our societies.
Tariffs. Shipping tariffs. Firstly, commonly seen during Brexit. A huge discussion on transport of goods through the English Channel to European soil. Tariffs really damaged exports and imports from and to the UK. While the United States of America, under Trump, even before Biden, started using tariffs as a methodology on specific countries that they didn't have neither a strategic dialogue nor an agreement, but they wanted to have a business foothold, let's say, into those countries, i.e. Southeast Asia. What is the role of tariffs? What is the role of tariffs with regards to the EU interests? So incoming into the EU, any port of the EU, and at the same time, how simplified or much more complicated has the process become when you are entering goods into the European Union?
Well, I think
by sea, obviously.
well, tariffs, protectionist measures, and all this kind of taxes, I must say, is something that they don't facilitate. They don't help the facilitation of trade.
But they are necessary.
In some respects, yes, but not if we see the entire framework. That's why we have to put shipping as part of the free trade agreements,
Right.
and to better understand what sort of facilitation and openings we should provide to external trading partners in exchange of better treatment, let's say, of our ships flying an EU flag to Brazil, to Japan, to India. So all these kind of issues are very important if we want to ensure that the facilitation of trade is uninterrupted, is fair, is unrestricted, and is not non-discriminatory.
Hence the agreement between the EU and Mercosur, for example.
Yes.
After 19 years of negotiations, did it facilitate the totality of the EU with the Mercosur Latin American states? Or is it better to think bilaterally, let's say Egypt, Cyprus, maritime bilateral relations, considering that Cyprus commits and fulfills all the necessary requirements of the EU? Which one is the best?
Well, according to the European Court of Justice, member states are not allowed anymore to negotiate a maritime transport agreement with external partners, because maritime transport shipping is considered as an exclusive EU competence.
Right.
But if you knock the door of Europe, as Cyprus or Greece or any state,
As the interlocutor to
and
Europe.
and inform that there is a real need for our national interest to negotiate something, you might get an exception to negotiate if there is not an EU interest at stake that time. So there is a way to do it, but it's not easy. So basically, you have every time to make sure that your interests are aligned with the overall EU interests in order to start opening other markets, start negotiating with other partners, and to make sure that your interests are prioritized from Europe accordingly. You need a good network in Brussels.
Of course.
You need to signal that any sort of partnerships or MOUs or agreements between Cyprus and Egypt, you mentioned Egypt, or any other neighboring country, could also facilitate the overall EU external trade. We should not forget that Cyprus is a gateway to these countries.
Energy hub.
And an
Egypt
energy, and we should
Cyprus as well.
grasp the full potential of this.
Right. I'm diverting a bit into Cyprus, Greece, and I'm coming back to the discussion of the connection between Greece and Cyprus. For civilians and their personal goods. I actually took the boat twice, actually.
Really?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
I'm glad to hear it.
The question is, how important was it to showcase this, not only to the leaders of the two countries of Greece and Cyprus, but also to convince the Europeans that this is a must, considering the so many years of not a connection? And what do you think will take place in the years after, based on this success story?
Well, first of all, it's a social issue. It's an issue of social cohesion to provide alternative connectivity to your citizens. I mean, we are already 2023, and imagine that the citizens of these countries, they were only able to experience the outside world only by air. So,
and it's an island.
yes, people with mobility problems, they they couldn't have this opportunity. So I remember 12, 15 years ago, I was involved in that project working for the shipping department in Cyprus and advising the Minister of Transport. We were trying to signal to Brussels the importance. It was not easy because Brussels, in terms of cohesion, they just allow funding between the mainland with islands in the same country, like Greece with
its own island,
with Aegean islands. Yes, but not from one country to the other. But we have demonstrated this, and we have built the narrative over the years that this is so important. First, we have tried with EU funds. It was not possible. My predecessor tried hard to convince that we should be allowed, at least with our national funds, to engage and to support this service. But it was really hard also to convince the industry because nobody was considering that this is viable. I remember the argumentation of many carriers saying, no, we are not going to do this only for 10, 15 people per year. And nobody was coming closer on all this. We tried with the first tender, it didn't succeed. Then we went back to Brussels to renegotiate the terms. And now we have the service running beyond expectations.
I can assure that. I can testify for that.
So basically, you see from both ends, using also the Greek citizens and the Cypriots using this service. And of course, this is subsidized for 3+3 years. So after that, the service provider, or any provider that is willing to engage, it has a very good sample of people that they are using
you
this
have a
service.
database of
so now
information.
we will have something to prove to
statistical information that you can
to the industry that this is working. And I'm sure that if the existing operator or some others that they're willing to engage, now they will have more data to consider if this business plan is viable. The other avenue is, of course, for Cyprus and Greece jointly, once they demonstrate to Brussels that this is a real must for the connectivity of Cyprus with the continental Europe through Greece, is to get a derogation or an extension for this subsidy for more years. The way the framework, the regulatory framework is now, it is not possible. But there is always, when there is a will, there is always a way to unlock the potential in Brussels and to convince that this is a real must. Not only for Cyprus.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Because now it's a case. It's a case for
now
both sides.
only Cyprus is subsidizing this service
by itself. Yeah.
But I think if you check the statistics, at least from the first year that I was still there in the Shipping Deputy Ministry, I must say that more than 30% of the citizens using the service, they were Greek citizens.
Dear Vassilios, thank you very much for your contribution. And I think it's all about jazz in the end. Considering that you have a rhythm in your life, what I understood from your book, you have a rhythm, a vision, an understanding of life, the way that you have envisioned, the way that you have experienced it. And it definitely shows through the discussion that we have made. I mean, we can go for hours and hours, and definitely we'll be glad to have you again at our show. But one of the things that I understood is that your knowledge and information on maritime affairs is dimensional, because you mentioned multiple times economical affairs, regulatory affairs, EU affairs, national affairs. And I think it's wise to say that the success of your work has been shown evidently into practice with a connection of mainland Europe.
Thanks a million for your kind words, for the hospitality, and for the opportunity to present my views, my perspective. And of course, when it comes to jazz or to real life, I must say that if you have a vision, if you have a plan, and if you dare to improvise following the vision, then you can strike a very good balance for success.
I know that you have plans ahead of you, and I'm looking forward to hearing and watching more. Thanks again for joining us, and I wish you the very best. And let me be allowed at this point to also invite you again in the near future to have the opportunity to talk even more on maritime affairs, considering this changing landscape in not only in the security landscape but also in the maritime affairs as well.
And all the best to you, Marius, for Strategy International, and on the fact that through your fantastic initiatives you are enlightening the global regulators but also academia to better understand the geopolitics in our globe. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you all for watching Strategy International's Prime Analysis. Please subscribe, like, share, and follow our social media. My name is Dr. Marios Eftimiopoulos, and I'm the CEO of Strategy International, and I was your host of Prime Analysis. And remember, impact makes a difference.